This story happened in February 2010 and shocked the entire Mangystau region. This story is about the violence of a man who was completely exhausted by endless poverty and pushed into a desperate situation, and about the tragic consequences that followed. For ethical reasons, I have changed the names of the people involved. I do not want to make the heavy burden carried by the victims even harder. Before we begin the story, I have one request. Please subscribe to this channel, like the video, and leave a few comments below. Zhumagul was 30 years old. He had a wife named Hadisha and a 4-year-old son named Eskendir. Zhumagul did everything he could to support his young family. He did not choose his jobs. He worked at the market, on construction sites, and as a security guard. The most important thing for him was simply to get paid. But as prices kept rising, his income was barely enough to pay the rent and buy food. Tired of temporary and unstable jobs, Zhumagul began looking for a job with a higher and more stable salary. He had also heard people say, all oil workers are rich. Through people he knew, he learned that large oil companies in western Kazakhstan were hiring workers for rotational shifts. He discussed it with his wife. After all, there was no stable work here. Apart from their rented apartment, nothing was really keeping them there. They did not have much to lose. So in just one day, Zhumagul packed their belongings and left from southern Kazakhstan toward Mangystau, specifically toward the Muneli district. The Muneli district of Mangystau region is located about 16 kilometers from the city of Aktau. It is also close to the coast of the Caspian Sea. The area is rich in oil and gas, so most of the local population works in the oil industry. In November 2009, after arriving in Mangystau, Zhumagul settled his wife and son in the cheapest rented apartment he could find. He then started going from one oil company to another looking for work. Unfortunately, none of the oil companies hired him. Zhumagul had come there with dreams and hopes, so he became very discouraged. But he had to support his family, so he returned to temporary jobs. He worked in construction, carried heavy loads at the market, and did all kinds of other work. But his income was not enough. The money he had saved before also ran out. His wife Hadisha did not show much understanding either. There were arguments, shouting, and fights at home almost every day. Because of this, Zhumagul did not go home immediately after work. He would spend 4 or 5 hours walking around outside and only entered the apartment when his wife and child had finally fallen asleep. Another month passed like this. In December 2009, the weather became extremely cold. Because Zhumagul could no longer pay the rent, the landlord threw him and his family out of the apartment, while his wife and 4-year-old son were standing outside, freezing from the cold. Zhumagul bought a newspaper from a nearby kiosk and desperately started looking through the job advertisements. Then he noticed one particular advertisement. A farm was looking for a shepherd. The employer provided a place to live, and the worker could live there with his family. Zhumagul immediately called the farm, made an agreement with them, and left that same day. The owner of the farm in Mangystau region placed Zhumagul and his family in a small one-room house. There were almost no basic living conditions. The house had electricity, but they had to get water from a well, and they had to heat the house with firewood and coal. His salary was 80,000 tenge. The good thing was that they could provide themselves with food. Zhumagul told his wife that they would stay there until the weather became warmer, until spring. Hadisha had no other choice. And so their monotonous life began. Every morning, Zhumagul went out to take care of the sheep. In the evening, he came back, ate, and went to sleep. The next day, everything happened the same way again. They even celebrated the New Year of 2010 there. Being over 30 and taking care of someone else's sheep was very painful for Zhumagul's pride. But what else could he do? What can poverty force a person to do? While the sheep were grazing, he often got lost in his thoughts. Sometimes he wanted to leave his wife and child and go somewhere far away to start over. But his conscience would not let him. He especially worried about the future of his 4-year-old son, Eskendir. In 2 years, he would have to send his son to school. He would have to buy him clothes and make sure he was not worse off than the other children. But in his current situation, he could not provide his son with anything. These thoughts and his helplessness were eating him up inside. So Zhumagul began looking for hope in religion. He thought that perhaps the reason his life was not going well was because he was not worshiping God properly. He started reading religious books. Later, he also began talking to his wife about religion and tried to involve her as well. Hadisha was happy to see a small spark of hope return to her husband's eyes. In February 2010, Zhumagul told his wife that they needed to make a sacrifice to God and give charity. Hadisha did not know that he had any bad intentions, so she agreed. Suddenly, while Hadisha was inside the house, she heard her son's voice coming from outside. She immediately ran outside. What she saw was terrifying. Her son's hands and legs were tied and Zhumagul was trying to sacrifice him. Hadisha immediately stopped her husband and took her son inside the house. Then she called an ambulance and the police. Fortunately, the ambulance arrived quickly. The doctors took the boy to the hospital. Zhumagul was arrested by the police. At first, investigators considered the possibility that he might have been a member of some religious sect. But this theory was not confirmed. A psychiatric examination found that he was mentally healthy. The court sentenced Zhumagul to 15 years in prison. 4-year-old Eskendir survived. However, because of the serious injuries he suffered, his health was permanently affected. The reason why Zhumagul treated his own son this way remains unknown. Perhaps he mistakenly believed that pleasing God would save him from poverty. Perhaps hopelessness had affected his mind so deeply that